So from where I am, good morning, everyone from New York. I just want to start by saying thank you all for attending our first session on climate, which we are holding today with our partners at Impatience Earth. This series will roll out in three parts throughout the month of November, and each session is going to be led by speakers who are environmental experts and advocates. And the workshops will focus on key climate-related issues linked to specific impacts of climate change in the Arab region. So our first session today will look at how philanthropic organizations can do their part to help more than 400 million people in the Arab region who face potentially devastating consequences if we don't start taking serious action to combat climate change now. I hope that you have found the resources which we have sent you through the Zoom confirmation informative and made you ready for the session. I'm gonna put in the chat the link to the resources anyway when we start. Just before starting, I just want to mention a few words about Impatience Earth. Impatience Earth it helps organizations see how climate change can fit with their philanthropy strategies. The team of climate and philanthropy experts take corporate foundations, private foundations, and family offices on learning journeys, and this is why we are here today. And Impatience Earth connects them to practitioners to help donors become more confident in supporting amazing organizations, ideas, and individuals to address the climate change issue. Our session today is going to be moderated by Aditi Shah. If you have been in our meeting, in our annual meeting in Cairo, I'm sure you have met her. Aditi is the Philanthropy Advisory Director at Impatience Earth, and I will let her introduce herself, of course. Aditi will inform you more on how the session is going to be run today, and she's also going to be introducing the speakers, the experts to you. Aditi, at this stage, the floor is all yours.
Amazing. Thank you, Walid. Yeah, like I said, really excited to kick off this series. And for my colleague Rosine and I, it's been a really kind of informative and interesting experience putting this together, as we're not from the MENA region. So we've learned a lot in this process as well. And we are really excited to kind of learn alongside you guys and hopefully co-create philanthropic strategies going forward together as well. My background has been on the receiving end of philanthropic funding. So I've mainly worked in social enterprises and nonprofits in food systems and education sectors. So it's interesting to be on the other side and working with funders directly as well. So just to go through a bit of housekeeping, we've got, me and Rosine have got some check-in questions for you before we invite our speakers in about 10 minutes. If you're able to, we'd encourage to keep your cameras on. It just really helps with engagement, especially when the speakers are coming in, and we want to make them feel that they're not speaking to kind of a black hole, but lots of lovely, friendly, smiling, curious faces. But would totally understand if you're in the middle of something and can't have your camera on. If you're able to stay on mute when you're not speaking, that'd be really great as well. The session is being recorded, so it helps with audio. And we are expecting hopefully a couple more people to be joining us. So it might be a lot of people to be kind of asking questions as we go along. So when the speakers are doing their presentations and you've got some questions or thoughts, do pop them in the chat box. And then when we're in the Q&A session itself, use the raised hand function on Zoom. And Rosie and I will kind of call upon you to come and share your thoughts and questions and reflections. We'll do our best to go through all the comments that are in the chat box. And if not, we can follow up after the session as well if there's anything in particular that you want to dive deeper into. So that's all for housekeeping. I'll be leading kind of the briefing and the session itself. And then my colleague Rosine, who's on the call as well. Rosine, if you give us a quick wave so people know where you are. She'll be leading the debrief at the end, which is for about 10-15 minutes. So we do ask that you stay on for that. So to just get us kicked off and get to know each other a little bit, since we're calling from lots of different places. If you're able to, in the chat box, write your name, where you're dialing in from, And if you were able to go through the resources that were shared prior to the session, what was something that you found interesting, new, or challenging when you were reading or listening or watching those resources? And if you haven't had a chance to read those, no problem. I would love to instead know about how and if climate change is impacting your work. See lots of furious typing faces on the screen for the ones that I can see. Hey, Maha, I think you've come in with my name, but I can rename you.
Oh,
Hey,
hi, Edith. Hi, everyone.
Hey. We're just doing a bit of a briefing, and then we'll kick off with the session in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Nadine, you're dialing in from Riyadh. Welcome. Rosine from Ghana. Got an international crowd. Erica from Wings, from Montreal. Lovely to have you all. Saeed, welcome from Jordan. We're hopefully going to be touching upon some of these regions in the session today. I know that Maha's specialty is in Iraq, but she's got lots of experience in other regions as well. And Patricia, thank you for sharing. You're calling in from London. And don't worry about doing the homework. We want, there's lots of information that's going to be flowing to you, all of you, in the coming weeks. So dip in and out as you can and as you want, and also want to be conscious of the fact that we're going to be talking about quite kind of heavy things and heavy themes, and to make sure that you keep looking after yourselves during this this kind of learning session. And Nancy, thank you for joining us from Austria. And we've got Hashim from Jordan as well.
Got Tori from Colorado that we went by US. Welcome, Tori.
Oh, great. And just to get a sense, are there funders in the room? Are there kind of nonprofits in the room? Are you all starting on your climate journey? Kind of to get a sense of where you're all coming from. Welcome, Sharif and Hussein from Tehran. Got some more people joining in.
Welcome, Munir, journalist from Jordan. Welcome, Richard. We're just asking people to put in the chat their name, organization, and where they're dialing in from.
We got Flavia, founder of MENA from Lebanon. Lovely to see art and culture in this space as well. It's such a diverse backgrounds that you've all got. I was under the false impression it will be just funders, but lovely to have this kind of collaborative, collective, kind of diverse space to see how we can start integrating climate into all of these aspects, from journalism to art to culture to social innovation, which is really exciting. We've got some master's degree students in here as well. Amazing. Great. I'll do a quick run through of the session, Waleed. I think there might be a couple more people coming, but let's kick off that. Now we've got some some names to faces and some context to faces on this call. We've already got one of our speakers with us here. We've got Maha, and we're also going to be joined by Serene. The way the session will run is that I'll introduce both of them when Serene is here in a bit more detail. And we've had conversations prior to the session. We've talked about kind of their expertise and their research areas and their practitioner areas. And so the idea very much is for them to have, 15, 20 minutes to share their knowledge and their experience and their expertise with you all around the kind of topic of how climate is affecting the MENA region. Serene has got more of a kind of specialty within, I guess, just transitions and climate justice, and Maha, who's here with us right now, has got more of a expertise in kind of security within the context of Iraq. But, given the various kind of political situations and economic situations in the region, I think a lot of what's happening in Iraq can also be applied to other regions, and we can draw parallels between the two. So we're really hoping that as a result of today's session, you'd have a good kind of baseline understanding of how climate is playing out in different regions within the Arab world. Draw upon some examples of people that are working on solutions for those. And hopefully that will form a good foundation for us to then dig into topic areas such as food and youth and health, which are kind of more funding areas that we have. And we've just got Serene dialing in. Welcome. Lovely to have both you and Maha here. We've just been doing a bit of a briefing with the attendees. But I'll just do quick intros for you both, and then Serene, I'll give the mic over to you, and would love for you to talk to us about a couple of the themes that I'll mention shortly. So just for the sake of introductions, Maha is a research fellow at the Klingendale Institute, and she focuses on climate security in Iraq and the wider Middle East region, and works as a climate change consultant for various other organizations as well. And she really has a deep experience in the humanitarian sector and specializes in civil society engagement and addressing environmental and climate threats, particularly in the southern region of Iraq, which I'm sure we'll learn more about. Serene is the program director of the environmental politics program at the Arab Reform Initiative. And before she was at ARI, she worked for 15 years at the American University of Beirut's Fairs Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, and has done lots of kind of work on strategic management, fundraising, partnerships. And when we spoke, what really stood out was her interest in kind of environmental policy planning and just transition, as that being the focus of the climate work within the MENA region. So with kind of intros out of the way, Serene, I'd love for you to kick us off and give us kind of an overview of climate impacts and risks in the MENA region today, and kind of how things like food and water and development goals are going to be impacted in the short and long term if we don't start looking at kind of funding and philanthropy and work in this sector from a climate lens.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very honored to actually be with this wonderful group. I see some faces that I've known from before, and good to know some of you are from the region or have been in this region that is going through multiple turmoil. It's a never-ending wars after wars, displacement, injustices are present in our daily activities and our daily lives. So to talk about climate change and specifically in our region, and thank you Aditi and the foundation as well for this invitation. It's mostly to look at one thing, and for us, so I'll just go through the outline of. So I'll present a little bit of where we are in the climate change, and of course the impact of the climate change on the region itself, and then what are the different opportunities for us in our region also to adapt to these different changes, and what will be the injustices that we are facing. And third, maybe to look at what we as Arab Reform Initiative are engaging with civil society actors and other activists from the region. And I'm very happy that Maha is also a friend and colleague who is on this panel together. So to go back to where we are, at the moment, just a couple of figures. It is forecasted that currently the population of the MENA will double by 2070. So, however, climate change will likely reduce water resources by an additional 15 to 45% by the end of the century. So this will affect the agriculture in the region, which is 70% rain-fed. And as we know, agriculture is one of the largest employer in our region. Syria was the food basket of the whole region, even Egypt. So at the moment, the MENA region countries are heterogeneous in a way, but also that we have different socio-economic conditions. So the low-income countries, and we can't just say this is one MENA region. So we look at the Middle East as itself, the North Africa, and we have the Gulf countries that have their own opportunities, but also their own capacities to adapt and to also their economic strength. So on the other hand, here, the GCC countries, they pose stronger limits to adaptive capacity building, unlike the low, middle, or middle income countries such as Algeria, Djibouti, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and others, Lebanon, and as well. So with the population in our countries, the low middle income countries, is 444 million in 2017. And this represents around 85% of the MENA population. So where are we now? We are definitely very or highly vulnerable to climate change due to also the arid conditions that we have in our countries with limited water resources and agricultural land. So it is definitely the most water stressed area globally with a high population density that is going to be exacerbated due to climatic changes and the climate crisis. So some of the impacts, and here I'll name 4 impacts that we are going to face. One is temperature and precipitation changes. We've seen the latest IPCC report. It confirms that the rising temperatures and declining precipitation in North Africa that is going to be affecting the region's water availability. It is also predicting that the temperatures will rise at a faster rate than the global average, leading to water crisis and chronic shortages. So the region is on an average warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. 2, the heat stress mortality. There have been several studies that are suggesting that limiting global warming to 2 degrees Celsius will still result in a 3 to 7-fold increase in heat stress mortality risk for individuals over 65 of years by the 2100. Third, sea level rise. Around 7% of the population lives in areas than 5 meters away or above sea level. So coastal areas, vital for economic activities, urban centers, and agriculture are all at risk. And these studies estimate that approximately 24% of the MENA coastal GDP and 20% of the coastal urban areas face exposure to sea level rise, storm urges, twice as the global average. And 4th, potential displacement. Sea level rise could definitely impact 43 port cities in the region and potentially displace over 2 million people in cities like Alexandria if there is a 0.5 meter rise by the end of the century. So in conclusion, and of course we'll have this debate how we go to the just transition, the MENA region faces severe climate-related changes, including water scarcity, temperature rise, sea level increase, which will profoundly impact various sectors of human life. So definitely urgent policy interventions are necessary. And if we look now, we are actually hosting by the end of this year the conference of parties in Dubai, and it has been a very skeptical, but also optimistic in a way, but also a very skeptical convener, because if we look at the UAE, that is heavily dependent on hydrocarbons and on fossil fuel, and also the head of the COP at the moment, Sultan Al-Jaber, he's coming from Anera. It's a private company. He's a CEO of in his even public speeches or private speeches, he was more inclined towards keeping it as business as usual. So there is definitely a lot of, pivotal or turning points now in the global climate action. So we're looking at transitioning economies from fossil fuel to renewable energy. And we've seen this going on. But now the notable absence of the key Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, and we've seen this during the COP21 at the Paris Agreement, they initially indicated their reluctance toward climate action. However, there is a bit of a shift of delegation towards what they have adopted, a more diplomatic approach, more engaging civil society, and accepting compromises within the Paris agreements, possibly due to various factors like economic consideration, international pressure, and the understanding of the impact of climate change. So this altered Saudi position, and this is where it's important to look at, since we're talking about the MENA region, and this is the big elephant in the room, are the Saudis, the Emiratis, but mostly the Saudi position, emphasizing long-term emission neutrality and economic diversification away from fossil fuels, marked a significant departure. This shift has influenced other Arab nations like UAE and Qatar, both investing in renewable energy initiatives. So from here, we've seen post last year from the Sharm el-Sheikh summit that all GCC countries, with the exception of Qatar, have pledged to achieve a net zero emissions target by or around the mid-century, complementing this holistic national climate strategy. Of course, I mean, we can talk more about Saudi Arabia and even the UAE, just also giving contextual factors. Why is the UAE even looking at and hosting this COP by the end of the year? And Aditi, tell me if we're okay on time. The UAE, so it was one of the first Gulf states to announce a national strategy in 2017, and this is National Climate Change Plan by 2050. So here we're looking at the climate strategy, which was designed around 3 objectives for them. So the first, it was around the UAE's capacity to adapt to climate change and enhancing its economic diversification agenda through innovative solutions. And the latter objective, it was for the UAE to be the first GCC state to link its climate strategy with its economic development and its framework. So it is here important to look at back to the justice agenda. Where is climate justice today when it comes to these international forum or these international some of the organizations actually which I've talked to recently are thinking of boycotting their participation at the COP this year due to the Gaza war. But at the same time, other activists are saying this is a space for us in our region. The region is lacking and is shrinking its civic spaces to engage with other activists, to engage with global activists from the north as well as from the south, and to create coalitions and even understand what are the different positions when it comes to climate justice. But today, when we talk about climate justice in the context of the region, it is definitely not something completely disintegrated with the democratic processes that we need to have. We need to re-initiate new types of economy. When we're talking about just transition, it was mentioned in the Paris Agreement, and now more and more we're seeing this concept, which is somehow kind of new. We've had, in the last few months, we've had several discussions with activists in the region as well. And the concept of just transition is very Western. It's not a concept that is used in our lexicon, in our discourses. So, but it is definitely affecting, and the whole concept means that populations will be impacted differently, and those who are poor will get poorer, and the vulnerable populations need to have, such as youth, women, minority groups, and others, should have a say of how climate is actually affecting their livelihoods, their income, their health, our livelihood, our income, even our land, our water, our energy. And we're seeing this more and more. We are in a region, and specifically the Levant, when the war erupted in Ukraine and the Russian invasion. I mean, we were food insecure. We didn't know exactly where are we going to import our wheat. So exactly this is the issue, knowing that in the past, Syria and Egypt were actually producers of wheat. So what happens to this region? It is many, many years of neglect, of mismanagement, of not putting the environment at the forefront and at first at priorities. and has reached to this level that we are very dependent on exports. And when we're talking about, this is more the Levant. Of course, other injustices in the region, and here we look, Algeria is the second largest producer and even sells its natural gas to Europe. Morocco is one of the countries of the region that is now looking at more and more projects and has been supporting a lot of projects and receiving funding from the international community on solar panels. But today, and I'm sure you've seen the James Bond movie, it's also shown in the movie itself, but what happens to the land? You know, if you talk to the farmers on the ground, and there are unions, even in Tunisia, that the farmers are saying, we don't want the solar panels to provide energy for home and electricity for home. And at the end, we still don't have electricity, we still don't have water, and we still cannot use our land. So who are these international projects, mega projects in Morocco, in Tunisia, even in Algeria? Who are they serving, and for whom and for what? So if we are talking today about a just transition, it is this type of transition. If we're transitioning away from fossil fuel, if we're transitioning to new types of economies, if we're transitioning to a new system, a greener system, it means that all our policies have to be just, which means that socially, economically, politically, environmentally, all actors in our societies have to have a voice, and all actors in our societies will not be impacted the same way. Some people will need to be displaced, others will lose their jobs. So what will happen to these voices? And this is, and we here as Arab Reform Initiative, these are the forum that we are creating. We're creating spaces for activists to create alliances, but also to regain trust of our systems. We have lost trust in our governments. I think this goes into all of our governments of our region, but we also lost trust of the international donor community that keeps on supporting these mega projects, super opportunistic types of projects that at the end, the local farmer, some of the other groups, those who are most vulnerable, will be impacted the most and have not been consulted throughout this process. So this is where we have to put justice at the forefront of every decision-making process, but also at the level of policy, that to have a transitioning, we need to involve all actors of society and understand the impact will not be the same, and adapting to these climate changes are not going to be the same for everyone in our societies and in our economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene. What a great whistle-stop tour about the various impacts across the region. And I think that kind of last point you made about, you know, like the loss of trust in governments and international funders who support opportunistic projects, I think that really builds the case for kind of AFF members to start venturing into this space, right? And really thinking about kind of community-led, place-based funding, and to really bring justice at the center of this and to create the public policies that work for people and planet. So thank you for raising that as well. I'd love to come over to you, Maha, and I know we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into a specific region, which is your area of expertise, and would love to kind of hear from you about, you know, in your work in Iraq, how is climate affecting the security situation? And how does this in turn have a knock-on effect on things such as, you know, access to food and water and kind of international relations in general? And how can a country in such kind of turmoil, which, as Siri mentioned, isn't the only country in the region, how do you respond to the climate issues and the environmental issues that you face, and how is that kind of balanced or incorporated into decision making and policy and collective action within a country?
Yes, thank you, Aditi and Sareen. First of all, just to correct one information, I do not work with the Click and Dial at the moment. I worked with them, and currently I work with the IRIS. It's a research institution works with the American University and Suleimania. So first of all, I think me focusing in Iraq would be like a case study on what all these climate change impacts in the region are manifested in Iraq, but to zoom in more on the southern region of Iraq as a region affected by water scarcity, heat waves, and so on. First of all, I would like to start with the impacts of the climate change on Iraq, and also the poor management or the response to these impacts. Probably we will read in a lot of resources that Iraq is heating up as twice as the rest of the world, or the impact of climate change on Iraq is doubled than the rest of the MENA region. And what is making it more affected by this impact is the lack of the response, or a proper response to these impacts, that makes Iraq severely affected by mostly water scarcity, which has been one of the biggest issues that the country is suffering from for the last 4 years. We're entering now a 4th year of severe drought, although like some scientists expect that this year will be more wet, but we still didn't see any proof of that. We are in November and I'm still using air conditioning, so we're still suffering from a lot of heat and a lot of drought. Water scarcity has caused desertification. Currently, 92% of the land of Iraq is affected or threatened by desertification. In turn, this is increasing the problem of sand and dust storms that is causing more health problems and economic losses that is incurred mostly in the southern region of Iraq. Another impact of water scarcity is water pollution and water salinization. The lower flows of the Tigris and Euphrates are pushing we call it saltwater intrusion from the Gulf towards the southern region, and this is affecting the agricultural lands, but also the biodiversity, and even changing the biology of the rivers, and mostly the marshes, which is a big ecosystem shared by the 3 southern provinces in Iraq that is now heavily affected by this problem. What is happening because of the water scarcity? The impact is, of course, loss of livelihood of thousands of people depending on it, from the north to the south. So when I'm talking about southern Iraq, I'm not saying that the problem is not affecting the Kurdistan region of Iraq. It's equally affected by water shortages. Loss of livelihood, loss of biodiversity, and this is in turn pushing thousands of people to migrate towards urban centers. This is something that we saw in Basra, the 2nd largest province in Iraq. It's becoming more crowded. People are competing on employment opportunities. They are accused, people who are migrate to the city are accused of crime, of drug abuse or drug dealing. At some point of some regions, their children who immigrate with these families are prevented from going to school or register their kids in schools. They are even prevented of access to from accessing like the public services, like when they immigrate, they live in unstable, let's say, places where they have less access to water and sanitation, and making their life even more difficult. So let's say when these people immigrate, their life conditions are not always improved. Sometimes it gets even worse, and this sometimes pushes them to join criminal groups or even militias, that is causing even more security issues. To give you one example of how basically climate change or water shortages contributing to stability, in 2018 in Basra, because of water shortage, there was also water pollution because the pollutants are concentrating in the little amount of water that we have in the big river here. And there was a big a poisoning issue that affected thousands of people here. And of course, people out of frustration, they were protesting, and the protest was faced with a lot of oppression from security forces, but also from militias here. And there was a big security and instability issue in the south of Iraq that, in my opinion, gave the spark to the protest that happened in the following year in 2019, and what we call Shireen movement or October movement, that at the end took down the government, and till today we are still suffering from the impact of that issue, which is originally was a water scarcity and pollution problem in the south of Iraq. And this is like one concrete example that climate change is affecting stability. Another forms of impact on stability is that every summer in South Iraq we have we witness a small scale protest from the residents of the villages or the marshes who live close by the oil production companies who are flourishing in these regions, and at some point taking the land of these farmers, because by the government these companies have the power to take land of farmers who are in a close area to these oil fields. These people, of course, seeing that these oil companies are expanding, they are producing more and more oil, polluting the area, polluting the land, and these people are also losing their agriculture areas without any opportunity to be employed by these companies. And of course, they are protesting every year. Sometimes the protests escalate to the extent that they close the roads that people goes, like employees goes to these companies, and at some point they even stop the production in these oil companies, which is the lifeline of the economy in Iraq. Another, I think, impact of climate change, as I said in the beginning, is the heat waves. That is, we witness that they become longer and more frequent. In summer in Iraq, it's becoming normal now that the temperature exceeds 50 Celsius for a few days, and because of that, the government has a policy of what they call it heat days, where they give the public sector holidays. Why they give these holidays? Because they want to want to reduce the pressure on the power plants that usually collapse during these severe heat waves. And this is, of course, made people think of investing in clean energy. But the reality in Iraq is completely opposite. The government of Iraq is investing in establishing more power plants that is operated by fossil fuel. And fossil fuel, of course, in Iraq, the natural gas, we burn a lot of it, and this is also creating an additional impact of a climate change, at least regional, that's polluting the air, but also polluting the water when there is rain. So the groundwater, for example, in Iraq is always polluted in the areas where these oil companies are flaring the gas, which makes access to this water even more difficult for the farmers who depends on it. Back to the clean energy solution to the problem of heat waves here. A lot of people has been thinking of investing in it, but the government policies to regulate this market is very difficult to access. Only very few and smaller projects are working on the ground. The impact is still very limited. That's why we still have a bigger problem in scaling up clean energy production in Iraq, although it's very needed. Yeah, I think these are the most important, let's say, impact of climate change and how they are impacting the stability. Of course, one of the reasons that the response to climate change is still very limited in Iraq, and it's not a priority because decision makers here, they don't see it as a bigger problem that's affecting stability. That's why we're trying to bring this topic to decision makers, that the impact of climate change is not only on human, on livelihood, but also on the overall stability of the country. The excuse is always that the water problem is basically caused by Turkey and Iran. These are the two countries who are controlling the water flow from Tigris and Euphrates, Turkey through their damming project, and Iran through their project to convert the flow of the rivers into the country. But the negotiation, like we know that there are negotiations on increasing the water flow through Tigris and Euphrates, but the impact is still very limited. Also because Turkey and Iran are affected by climate change, but they have, of course, stronger policies and they can control the water sources better than Iraq. And of course, the other reason is that also Iraq says that problems of terrorism or political instability take more priority than the impact of the climate change. And then Turkey always uses the argument that Iraq is wasting the water that we are already giving to Iraq, which is also, like, in a way true. Our water management here is very poor. This is why you see the southern marshes are completely dry this year, and sometimes when these farmers from the marshes protest, the ministry responses, and then the problem is solved, at least for a short term. So you can tell that it is also a water management issue. Yeah, for now, I think that's enough. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Maha. Really interesting to hear about kind of the link between both, right? How security worsens the impacts of climate change and how climate change is impacting kind of the effects of the security kind of issues that some of the countries are facing. Just to wrap up, I guess, both of your presentations, and before we go into the Q&A with the audience here, I'd love to get from both of you, you know, if you had $1 million USD budget as philanthropic capital, what would you use it for? How would you spend it? What are kind of some of the interventions that you think would be impactful as a starting point to start addressing this kind of really complex web of connections and issues that we see in the region when it comes to climate and all the other issues that we've talked about?
I can start. Yeah. So first of all, I think I didn't mention the role of the civil society here and the researcher. And I think although it's very small and the impact is very limited here because we were basically only allowed to have a civil society after 2003. And when it started, it focused on issues related to human rights, women rights, etc. Climate change came at the very end, or the impact on environment came very end. And when they started with addressing environmental issues, not necessarily climate change issues. As I said, their impact is very limited. They are not supported by the government. They are even prosecuted by the government and non-state actors. A lot of them were threatened, killed, and a lot of them had to leave the country. So which largely affect their work on the ground. Most of the time, they work on raising awareness issues. They work with international actors, but still with a very limited capacities and resources. I think if I have this amount of money, I would strengthen the capacity building and knowledge sharing and research. We still need a lot of information and a lot of research and data so we can build a robust response. most of the information that we get on how climate change impacting our region comes from the West. And then people there write for us recommendation on how to solve our own or the issues that basically the West is created, and then we are basically suffering from it. I think people have the knowledge here to address these issues, but they need to be trained. We need to create data and information and strengthen basically our researchers, the civil society who are responding to this issue. Of course, I'm not saying that civil society can solve it. At least in Iraq, NGOs cannot work by themselves without collaborating with the government or with the state or even non-state actors, because they are more powerful, they are armed. You cannot access an area without their authorization. You have to work with both. But civil society have people who are more interested in the case, have people who are in touch with the affected communities or vulnerable communities. They can plan programs that can respond to their urgent needs. And I think these are the people who should be strengthened. So funding their project and work with them on designing the project, and then work with the government as well on to basically let these people work on the ground. Also, I would maybe spend it on researchers from the universities, or also independent researchers, because these are the people who can provide, let's say, neutral recommendations. So if neutral recommendations, and they are in touch with what is happening on the ground. And of course, raising awareness. This is what we need. A lot of people talk about climate change, but like I'm in Iraq now for like a research trip, and I talk to people, even people within the government, local governments, they still don't know how to basically design adaptation and mitigation project. They still don't know. People in Baghdad, for example, in the capital, they don't know what is happening in the villages in the south of Iraq or in the Kurdistan region. They just live in a bubble. They don't know what is the actual problem and how to respond to it. And I think raising awareness should start with these circles, and not only the people around them. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. Sareen, how about you?
Yes, thank you. I mean, yeah, to follow on what Maha has already said, definitely research is needed in our region. And it's also looking at research that is multidisciplinary, with a multidisciplinary lens, and research that it has an impact on the different injustices and the different also, and this is a big thing now, how war is actually affecting the environment is really high now. We're seeing this in many parts of the region itself, and even historically in the US, in Iraq as well, and other parts of the world. So it is important to understand and to have data that is generated from the region, which is critical these days. And we, as Maha said, we rely a lot on Western information and Western data. But how do you create this? It is also to generate your own research. You need also, to empower the universities that are training these researchers in the liberal arts, that offers critical sense of, when you look at environment, it is a political issue. If you can't just talk about the environment without looking at politics. If today you have a landfill next to your house, this is not just someone who decided. It has a political meaning, but it has also political and economic and social impacts and consequences. So I think it's definitely, yes, research is very important. And the second would be to have an impact. And how do you monitor impact? How do you have an impact in these kinds of region? And who reads this research? It's not just research that goes into a peer-reviewed journal. It is how this research is actually communicated in the press, in the media, in the new types of media. Today, we don't, if you have an internet connections, you can go online and get your information, but it's also, to have accurate information is also very critical. So this is definitely these two. And the third, I would say, a lot of the population of the region are women, youth, and many of them want to leave the region. Yeah, they want to leave the region to find a better, this is a study actually I had with a Syrian woman I had interviewed. And she told me, the first thing that I want from my child, I left Syria and I came to Lebanon, and there was an explosion in 2021. And her child told her, why did you bring us to a country where there are bombs and explosions, etc., or there's a war? Parents or women, people want better opportunities, and they think that outside of the region, they'll have a better opportunity, or they will go to the Gulf. I think it is also important to readdress the Levant, and specifically universities, research centers, and think tanks of the Levant and North Africa, and give spaces, give spaces for young activists and other civil society actors to be able to convene. It's so challenging to even organize a meeting somewhere in Tunisia these days without, there is always fear. Fear is present in our lives every single day. So this is fear of a war, fear that if you say something, you will get arrested, fear if you won't get a visa, let alone if you have a passport. So this is definitely present, fear that you won't have water, etc., food, etc. So it is important to rebuild these different spaces in our societies that give the voices for youth, women, those that have been all these years, marginalized, to be part of these processes. So I think these are the main three areas of opportunity, I would think. But again, employment is a huge issue. We live in a region that has a lot. I mean, Jordan is I think it's 80% now. 80% of the youth are unemployed or seeking a way to move out of the country. So it is a region that is very young and doesn't have job security, and this is also globally a global phenomenon since the COVID pandemic, but it is definitely affected a lot in our societies and in our countries. So in a way, this is what we do is create these opportunities for people to network, to get employment, to find a livelihood, and there is a lot of informal. People work in informal sector in our societies. Not everyone is registered. Not everyone has a work permit. Not everyone has a contract. So they work informally. So it's also important to look at these informalities that are also contributing to the economic situations of our countries. So yeah, research, policy spaces. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both. Such great ideas and very kind of tangible actions that we can take as a kind of a philanthropic community. And I think with that, I'll bring my kind of questions to a bit of a pause and open up the room. If anyone wants to either come off mute and share reflections or things that it's made you think about, any questions that you might have. And I'm gonna let a bit of awkward silence run in the room until someone's brave enough to hit that unmute button and share their thoughts with us.
I could start if you would like. Maybe I could just pick up on Serene's last point, this idea of creating space and opportunity for youth and non-youth to feel comfortable to debate these topics, to feel comfortable to engage in dialogue and to talk about these in the region. I'm not from the region personally. I'm from the UK, but I have spent more than 15 years of my career working in the Middle East, not in North Africa, And I can see how institutions like the American University of Beirut, for example, where I worked in the business school, but many years ago, how there's a great opportunity for people to engage in that debate on climate change and sustainability and maybe a change in economic systems. And Serene, I know that the centre that you worked at AUB as well, that was an area, the IFI, Islam Faris Institute, where when I was in Beirut, I used to love going to attend your events, actually, because there was this freedom of speech and movement, and both Lebanese and other regional voices there and other international voices attending those events, and it was a great space for engaging in dialogue on these topics. And so I concur. I think enabling, if I had $1 million to invest in this, if I may take that question as well, Aditi, happy to take $1 million to invest in this challenge. Then I think that creating that space for communication is vital. Yeah, I would agree and concur with Serene.
Thank you, Richard.
Sorry, it's not a question, but
no, it's a space for reflections and questions. So thank you for being bold and going first. Would anyone else like to come in with anything?
I guess I can follow it.
Okay, go.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, along the similar lines. My name's Erica. I'm with Wings. I guess I'm curious, like with the shrinking not shrinking, but a pretty already limited civic space and shrinking in some countries, we have funders that are in positions that hold power in depending on where they are and the connections and how they've generated their wealth. So I guess, what do you think the role, how can funders kind of surpass that fear that you speak about, and to try and leverage their power to have some influence over opening up that civic space and creating these spaces for youth, women, marginalized people, and also these more contentious conversations to occur with government, with private sector that can leverage their power and make a difference. How can we get over that fear that may be holding people back?
Would either of you want to reflect back on Erica's reflection?
Yeah, I can start. I think, thank you for your question, Erica. I think at least in Iraq, I'm not sure about the rest of the Middle East, but maybe it's a similar case in Lebanon. Funding civil society was very difficult, and it became more difficult after ISIS and also after the 2019 protest, because the state are suspecting that the funds goes to actors or to activists who are basically against the government, and this is what makes the impact is very limited and affected a lot of the activities of the civil society. However, some funders are still have a good reputation here, and a lot of NGOs still take money from them. I think the best way to overcome this fear of collaborating with international funders is that the funder needs to go to the government or to these actors who are in control and explain their agenda and objectives. To be transparent on how this money is spent and how is it going to spend and what is the impact, basically, and also include these the state actors in the activities of these NGOs, or organize more shared conferences and workshops where actors from the civil society, academia, and also the governments, they come together to discuss basically one threat that's affecting everyone equally, which is climate change. This is also something that we need to use as peace building among all these groups. We use the climate change as entry point for dialogue among all these actors who do not necessarily get around one table to talk about a lot of things. So climate, like international funders or regional funders, can use the climate change to build peace, to increase stability and dialogue among all these actors. And then in this way, there will be more trust in the objectives of these funders. And eventually, civil society can work freely with the amounts of money for their projects, in my opinion.
Thank you, Maha. Serena, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Sure. I think Tori also had a question, and then, but just, I mean, thank you, Richard and Erica, for your thoughts, and also to continue the conversation on what Maha has started. How do you break the fear? It's, well, by recreating trust, by, you know, also holding people accountable, you know, governments accountable of their decisions, and also by transparency. You know, if there is a certain policy set today when it comes, I will give an example on solar, for example, in Lebanon, around solar panels. We are in a country there where the energy demand has decreased in the last 3 years, but this decrease didn't decrease. If you say people have moved towards putting solar panels on their roof, but why are they putting solar panels on the roof? Because the government is not providing us with electricity. So we have to find a plan B, which is not even marketed or, you know, properly even set up by the government's policy. So if I can afford to pay $2,000 to install solar panels on the roof of my house, let's say, I will go and do that. But again, it goes back towards equity. So if you don't have the money, you're not going to use the $2,000 to go and spend it on solar panel. You'll go and pay the local generator guy who will provide you with the electricity, of course, not 24 hours. And you'll change your whole lifestyle, whether you take a shower in the morning because the water, and you'll have hot water, or at night you'll cook in the morning or at night. All your life pattern changes. So to say this example goes back towards the type of societies we also have are very much top-down. It is not where we don't have very solid, we have very strong civil society groups in the region. Some are well connected to outside of the region, but also we need to voice the different civil society groups within our countries, and our society. So it goes back towards creating bottom-up policies, giving the floor to different the voices for different people, and at the same time accountability, transparency, all of these different mechanisms that do not really exist in our region. So that's definitely one of the main priorities. And yeah, as Richard, you've mentioned, I actually serve now on the AUB, on the American University of Beirut, on the board of the university. And I was one of the founders of the Islam Affairs Institute. So, but now also, I mean, going back to, yes, these spaces are important. And I think now more than ever, solidarity is very important. Solidarity across, and this is where the fear is broken. Just to give a specific example, we've just created a working group on energy transition in the region. There is 7 or 8 members are coming from the region. We're creating another one on conflict. So when you belong to a group of intellectuals and you propose ideas on behalf of this group, this is where solidarity comes. As a group, we can be much more vocal. I can use my network or someone else's network to empower someone's work. I can have someone get funding to write a research proposal, etc. I can work around and create more synergies. And instead of me convening the same meeting, and maybe Maha mentioned, and another group convening another meeting, we're here supporting and interacting with each other. We're thinking together, we're producing knowledge together. And at the same time, we're also influencing policies together. So this is very important. And I'm proud that I'm part of the Arab Reform Initiative, because we do create these kinds of spaces. And there are others, of course, in the region. And this is where we create consortium. The whole actually initiative was created by different civil society actors in 2005 in response to the different uprisings in the region. So it is now a time where we need to go back to working as a group and voicing our concerns together, and even from the global south. There's every year, there's now in the last 2 years, there is a climate justice camp that Greenpeace, Roots, and others are organizing together, and it brings global climate activists from all over the global south. So this is important. We are creating spaces for global actors to come together, think together, understand languages that sometimes are very difficult at the level of the United Nations, these jargons that the Conference of Parties use, etc. And then everyone goes back home and there is somehow a mechanism. Of course, you have to make more of an effort, but we can start somewhere. So to end in a more optimistic way. And yeah.
Tori, I know that you wanted to ask first, and then I'll come to you, Sharif, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. The reason I'm speaking is because I couldn't hear AUB spoken about without saying my piece. I'm Tori. I was working with Jusur for about 10 years, holding space with them for Syrians to come onto AUB's campus and study English with the Center for Civic Society and Engagement. We produced this book. It's called The Climate Change Dictionary. It's a whole series about how the youth of informal tented settlements were, organizing their resources informally. But then, of course, the problem of documentation and paperwork and like how easy it is for me to walk on AUB's campus, and all my students got policed. And then eventually we had to shut down the program because you can't let hundreds of Syrians onto campus under certain political conditions. And so, as I think about this issue of justice, I always come back to the issue of paperwork and documentation. And this is also the education employment nexus problem. I don't know if there's a question here besides I think that climate change is a place to find common ground, working with the Association for Middle East Children and Youth Studies to help to formalize pathways for folks. But it's not just the government and militia and armed actors problem, it's also the sort of naturalization of paperwork and the naturalization of certain kinds of citizenship that prevents civil societies of certain forms to take shape. So I'm just wondering, are we finding ways to link the grassroots stuff that we're talking about here with policies in these governments to make small shifts about who gets to count as a citizen or who gets to count as a belonging person in a certain territory? And thank you so much for organizing this. I'm so excited that we're here talking about this.
Thank you, Tori. Serene, Maha, any reflections on that? I think for me, it kind of lands in that conversation of who are we serving and what is justice within the space, and those, it brings in the topics for me of what you were talking about, Serene, with the just transition and whose voices are being heard and who's benefiting from various philanthropic actions of public policies and things that we design together.
Yeah, understanding the policy is quite a complex, how, in the American way, think tanks are spaces, that support, lobbyists, quote unquote. I know we can't use the word lobby in the US or the think tank word, but it is a place where, you advocate for specific positions and specific based on evidence that you have done or research that you have conducted. And you go and you push Congress or other spaces, for certain decision. In the context of our region, who are our different policymakers that we can address this? It's again, we're back to very top-down decision-making processes, and sometimes it's just, a matter of a funding opportunity comes, and this is how, as a the Levantine region, we are very much opportunistic. There is now a specific funding. Our governments will go and sign this deal, and that's it. We're going to have a new program. a new education system, etc., etc. You don't know why this policy or this program was implemented. But in the context, I mean, yeah, paperwork, all of this takes a lot of time. And if we look at the displacement, because I've also worked with different Syrian women in Lebanon. Many of the women, they came from regions, you know, like Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, very rural areas, and all of a sudden they've been, they've been moved to highly urbanized. If those who are living in Beirut city, highly urbanized context. So you have to juggle bureaucratic processes. You have to know, where do you get aid and how do you get aid? Where do you get food? How do you even register your child or not? How do you go and actually, you know, get support? Navigating these bureaucratic processes, these humanitarian aid also agencies are not very easy. Sometimes, you know, you have to fill out so many forms. So yes, it is definitely a challenge. But I think for us, we are very much survival oriented. You know, it's because we don't have, because there is no, the governments are not being accountable, and you just have to create your own system and your own informalities to try to navigate these policies. For who we have to know who is our target audience. You know, when you prepare a specific paper, and this is why think tanks are interesting. You come up with a policy, 900 words. Policymakers will not read more than this if they decide to read, and you push for it. How you push for it? You publish it on your website. You go to different activities. You go to different events. You advocate. You use even civil society actors informally to use your data to push for their own agenda as well. So it is definitely goes back to the data that you generate is very, very important, and having knowledge is itself key to being able to influence. That knowledge that comes from the region, what are you offering, and how are you going to push for certain policies? So it is very much important to look at this. And yeah, so this is in a nutshell. But I think, yeah, we need to work with the parliamentarians, the informers, sometimes the political parties. But in our region, it is very complex. It is very, very complex because you can be co-opted, you can be, we lost trust. I mean, we lost trust in our savings in the banks are gone. We're still at war, and people are being arrested if they speak. So I think we need to rebuild trust in our systems and in our societies, and this is where solidarity is very important. Yeah.
Thank you, Sareen. Sharif, thank you for waiting so patiently. Maha, if I could take Sharif's question quickly and then ask you to come in with any response, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for this insightful session. I just wanted to add that due to the challenges and the catastrophic war in Yemen, many Yemeni people turning to solar energy solutions. So, in fact, out of 15 out of 20 governments in Yemen are completely without of the grid electricity. There is no grid electricity, and the remaining 5 governments is just they get just about 2 to 4 hours per day electricity. So because of that, Yemeni people are turning to solar energy solutions. The majority of them, and I can say all of them. But and for the question that if there is a fund for to fight the climate change, and I think I would recommend to specific the majority of this fund for this transition to solar energy. But my question is, how can philanthropists play a pivotal role in this transition and to solar energy, especially in Yemen or these countries with the war? Thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. Maha, did you want to come in with any other the thought from before, and if you've got any reflections on Sharif's question?
Yeah, I think I want to bring One point is, I think the problem of leadership that we have in our region, who is committed to address these issues. I remember like a small incident during my work at Clickendal. We used to train diplomatic employee from the ministries from the region, and at that point it was a group from Iraq, from Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I was talking about the impact of climate change that is driving people away from their communities, families, losing their livelihoods, and then this person, he said, like, I'm actually surprised that this issue is happening in Iraq, and he is Iraqi from Minister of Foreign Affairs in Baghdad, who supposedly going to be trained on these issues and going to negotiate on Iraq's water rights with its neighbor. And of course, I do not expect that this person is interested in learning more about this issue or following this. Otherwise, he would have learned it while he was working, while he's still in Iraq. And the problem, I think, Sarin touched upon it, is because a lot of these people who are putting in these positions have loyalties to their political parties or different loyalties that is not always important in this regard. And this is what I think a main problem in our region in general, not only in Iraq, that people who are assigned to drive policies to respond to these issues are not always trained in this regard, but also they are not interested in it. And I think one of the solutions is that international communities that could help the region is basically locating this leadership, these people who are interested, these NGOs, these young activists who are spending their own resources to basically raise awareness. I think this is very important in this regard. And for Sharif, I didn't hear like a lot of his intervention, so I leave it to Sarin, maybe if you have.
I think, Sharif, correct me if I'm wrong, the question was around, given the kind of lack of access to grid electricity, what's the role of...
Yeah, exactly. How can philanthropists play an important role in this or in supporting this transition to solar energies, especially for those people in wars and in countries with wars?
Yeah, and I think maybe just, a point of my personal view is that there's a role that philanthropy needs to play to be changing kind of public policy and taking up on that risk, right, of creating safe spaces and the repercussions of that, or kind of engaging with civil society. For me, that's one of the responsibilities of wealth and power holders, to kind of redistribute that and use that to look after others and create these spaces where civil society can exist. And the other arm is, if as a philanthropist you're not comfortable doing that because, as Sarin said, so many people in this region are living in fear day in, day out of, so, caused by so many different issues, then are there more kind of practical grants that can be made, right? That are community grants that can be, okay, this particular region in Lebanon or in Jordan or whatever it may be, are really on the receiving end of the impacts of climate, or the lack of grid electricity. So we're going to give 500,000 in this particular region to build a solar energy network to, prove a case of the financials behind this, or the mechanisms behind this, or the kind of the community case study and the community engagement. And it can build green jobs, it can, upskill people, it can provide electricity, which will create other economic opportunities. And I think there's, for me, kind of coming from a philanthropy background, I would say there's a role for philanthropy in that as well, to build those case studies in difficult, hard to reach areas where maybe public policy and government isn't paying attention, and philanthropy step up and do that work, and hopefully that will attract further government funding or public policy changes or things like that. Saeed, if you wanted to come in on that or anything else.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, colleagues. I'm working in infrastructure as an infrastructure engineer, and I worked in many countries within the region, in Iraq, in Jordan, for the Syrian response, as well as in Yemen, Sudan, and Lebanon as well. So I understand the challenges here, and I would like to actually echo to all what has been mentioned. But I also would like to raise an important issue, which is the infrastructure. For example, the water infrastructure in our countries, in Iraq, in Jordan. It is really poor. There is about 50% of the water, which is already scarce, has been lost, wasted, because of the leakages. And this is very important because we all suffer from the water scarcity, but we waste 50% of the water supply. So I understand that the water companies, the water authorities really trying their best to improve that. But it also needs support to really reduce that amount of losses. It's really great when you look at it. In Jordan, when water supply is once every 2 weeks, for example, especially in summer, it means really very small water per capita per day. It is less than 60 liters per capita per day. But greatly, 50% of that water has been lost. I would like also to give another example. I think it's a good example that I personally expressed. When we were working in Zaatari camp, for example, and we were able to manage to treat the wastewater coming from the camp and use it reuse it for the agriculture. As you all know, the camp is located in a desert, and we were able to get that treated water and use it for agriculture. This provided a chance for the Syrian refugees to work there and also support the host community around the camp. So it was a win-win situation. It was something really positive. So we need to look at and encourage such interventions. I think this is really important. But again, the point is we also need to look at the infrastructure because it is also a critical factor in that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Patricia, I've just seen your comment in the chat, and I feel, it's a little bit linked to infrastructure, right? If there's so much kind of war and destruction going on, and you can build infrastructure and it will be destroyed, and how do you start talking about climate in that space and in that context? If you want to expand a bit on your comment and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in a noisy space, but I think I can't recall who asked the question about Yemen, at least from the Iraqi context, one of the biggest challenges has been annual funding or large, very traditional institutional donors operating there. And I would argue are not the most innovative. The funding is quite restrictive. So my comment was kind of, I think it was Erica who asked it, is like, how do we encourage funders who are less risk averse to operate in more risky environments? And that's an existential question, I suppose. I also think it's so important for Arab funders to collaborate in these environments, because I think one of the challenges, at least again from the Iraqi side, is we look towards like Western governments for support, but why isn't the Iraqi government going to Jordan to collaborate on how they're addressing water issues? So that sort of thing. And even to Sareen's point, like encouraging civil society actor exchange across countries is so important because we have so much to learn from each other.
Thank you, Patricia. Maha, I saw your hand go up during that.
Yeah, I think like to follow on what Patricia said, Iraq is not a poor country. It's like it's considered a middle income country. That's why a lot of the humanitarian and also the development fund are being reduced significantly. And now like the government is supposed to be the main funder of these activities, mitigation and adaptation. However, the government is not putting this topic as a priority, despite all these conferences and talks. And I think in every conference where there is a high political representative in Iraq, they put this small paragraph on environment and climate change. It's becoming a trend that politicians is talking about it, but when you come to the implementation, it's still very limited. And one of the I think this brings me back to the issue of finding a leadership. And even though the Iraqi government re-established the Ministry of Environment in Iraq, I talked a lot with people from this ministry, and they only mentioned that their role is to monitor. They are not able to implement anything, at least in the local directorate in the south of Iraq or north. They only take orders from the ministry, who is limited in their role. Most of the time, the role is there is more freedom and role given to the Minister of Oil. And this brings me to the issue of taking over lands, of increase of protection, gas flaring, overusing water. This is a problem that oil companies and oil production here is doing, and it's basically no one is has the courage to talk about it. At least politicians. Some people talked about it and they were removed from their positions because the Iraqi government sees oil as a national security issue. If you talk about or criticize the practices of the ministry and the foreign companies and local companies that is abusing the environment, you are putting in a very difficult situation. Some people were threatened, and I know them personally, who made documentaries or talked to media about how these companies are abusing the environment, overusing the already scarce water in the south, and also polluted the environment. I think in Iraq, it's very critical. I am aware that our water management is very poor, as I mentioned, and also Saeed mentioned. Water is wasted, but it's also abused by other actors. We have industries like that is water intensive, and these industries are controlled by very powerful political parties that nobody actually telling them to stop or even influencing them. And this is one of the issues of poor water management in Iraq context. And I think it's also happening in other parts of our region.
Thank you. I guess one of the things that I've been reflecting on for the last hour is like there's a sense of urgency, of course, because the region especially is living through kind of the worst end of the climate impacts. You know, we heard the stats from Serena at the start, but also there's this case of constricted civil society space, the fear behind it, and the potential kind of lack of confidence or the lack of ability to start funding in that space or working in that space. So how do you balance those two extremes, right? Like how do we address the urgency of the crisis that we're facing, but be able to kind of look after people, protect people, create safe spaces to be able to address that urgency? And if anyone in this room has kind of, from the different regions and the different organizations that you've worked with, seen examples of that happening well, and kind of the patience and the resourcing and the time that is required behind that work to really kind of have an impact? Just kind of an open question to reflect upon.
Perhaps I could just say a couple of things. I don't actually have a direct example of I guess a success story that you're talking about, Aditi. But I think perhaps one of the answers is actually to pick up on what Serene had said, where locally produced research is encouraged. But I think matching that with international organizations is key. So I think perhaps what I'd like to say here is partnership. And sure, we talk partnerships, and that's very grand, but actually effective partnerships is very, very helpful in this. So I think when it comes to research, developing partnerships between international institutions and local MENA institutions would be very, very helpful. And then that can also lead into more comfortable public discourse, perhaps even, being able to share. It doesn't have to be live and in person, AUB or one of the other institutions. And sorry, I only mentioned AUB because I've worked there before, and it's obviously a big institution in Lebanon, but I know that there's lots of other institutions across the MENA region. And then that public discourse can be not held simply by MENA youth, but also MENA youth coupled with international youth. And I think that can create very positive change. I mean, a huge believer of youth-led of movements, and so I think, and then that filters through into society. It filters through into their families, and filters through into the, I guess, wider society as well. I hope that comment's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Richard. And we've got a youth session coming up in 10 days' time as well. So that will be, maybe you can touch upon that as well. But yeah, I think partnerships make total sense. And I think, but for me, it's important that kind of that partnership is influenced by voices in the region and are led by voices in the region, and kind of the research work that Maha was touching upon before, of needing to build that knowledge base that is from the ground up, right? Instead of it being Global North knowledge directing those partnerships, because we've seen that not work out in many cases too. But thank you for that reflection back. We've got another 5-10 minutes if anyone else wants to share.
Yeah, I also want to highlight the point that mentioned by a lot of people, is that we really need to invest on young people, young activists who are addressing this issue basically all over the world, not only in our region, because they see it their future and they are more invested in it. I think one of the ways, besides, of course, supporting their work, there is a lot of really good examples on Iraq and also Lebanon, Jordan, a lot of smaller groups. They're using their own funds or very small funds for like small greening campaigns or cleaning campaigns, but they're still limited in this in these small topics. These are the people who should be supported, and the support not necessarily has to be money and fund. It could be also linking them to the outside world, to other groups, not only in the region but also outside the region, to strengthen their capacities, to bring more attention to the work they do, to the cause that they are interested in. I think these people are the key to respond to the impact of the climate change in the future, and they require a lot of support as well, besides the research and knowledge sharing and capacity building in general.
Thank you, Maha. I think at Impatience Earth, Rosie and I work with a variety of funders, and there is definitely a big push around wanting to support youth. It's only been in the last 3 to 5 years that we've had youth representation and voices represented at discussions like COP. And I think I personally see the difference in the conversations with funders and practitioners about having those voices front and centered of the decisions that we make, because they're the ones that are going to be living through the crisis more than us here, I guess. And not to age anyone in the room. Great. We've got 5 minutes left. Has anyone got anything else that they'd want to share? If not, I'll do a quick wrap up and
maybe around the infrastructure. I mean, this is very important because we talked about water. You know, we're in a region where we have dams and dams and so on. Also, all these dams, are they really functional? And who is it serving to? Who is it serving for? And we still see, can give few examples, you know, it is serving specific in the case of Syria, definitely serving Iran or Turkey, more than serving other countries of the region. So this is also the understanding the geopolitics of the region and who are the different beneficiaries. And I think maybe Sharif here mentioned, you know, countries who are at war, that are also heavily dependent on international aid, you know, that comes post-conflict or even during conflict, is also to be questioned. The different mechanisms of these climates or these financial mechanisms. And we're seeing this now in the next COP around the climate financial mechanisms. Who will benefit from these international opportunities and how and so on. And we are in a region we have debts. We are unable to even pay our own debts, let alone receive more and more international loans. And most of our countries have collapsed financially. So I think it's important also to see how are these projects. Yeah, so I think that's, and definitely, yes, youth is it's an important, crucial group to involve more into decision making. But again, not the same youth who are going to the same events and so on. It is to also diversify these different voices. And it goes back to giving knowledge, and them also not talking about them, but talking with them. I think this is how I'll end. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. It was beautiful.
Thank you, Serene. Rosine, last one in, and we'll wrap up for sure. I'm conscious of time.
Decided to squeeze one last one in. Thank you guys so much. Learning a lot. As Aditi said, we're not experts in this area, so it's been fascinating to learn alongside you. I heard a couple of examples through this conversation, not just from you, Serene, from you, Maha, but from others who spoke, around people really taking matters into their own hands when governments have failed them. Right, so one example that stuck out for me was someone mentioned the lack of electricity, and some people who can't afford it started sort of implementing solar panels. Are there, with of course co-benefits for climate and the environment, are there other examples where we are seeing people really taking the matters into their own hands that funders can step in and, you know, maximize what's happening?
Yeah, thank you, Rosine. I think what I see from, at least on social media, some youth groups who are doing for like greening campaigns. This is like their own efforts. It's very small scale. This is something that I've seen in Iraq. It's just raising groups who are doing raising awareness on pollution. And also like responding to the desertification and dust storm problem by implementing small greening campaigns. Some of these groups are more organized, they are registered as NGOs. Some of them are still campaigns. They get small funds from local people, so they work for donations, small donations from people. But definitely to expand their work, international funds can support them a lot. There are a few examples where bigger parts of the land, of deserted land, are being restored. either by the local government in some provinces in the south. So there was a project, they called it a mangrove project. It's a plant that survives in salt water type, and this is something, this is an effort between the local government, I think UNICEF or UNDP in Iraq, but it's struggling because the fund is probably someone said, I think Patricia, is only for a short period, and then the project is left by itself to survive. So this is an effort that could be continued by longer term support. And of course, as I said, the problem in the marshes, the efforts are always there to restore the marshes, to help the farmers, and there are some well-known registered organizations that working in these regions. So yeah, I'm happy to share names and contact with you to reach out to these people, that support them, to learn from their experiences. I think they are doing great work, at least in Iraq. Maybe Sareen know more in the region.
Thank you so much, Maha. I'll definitely be in touch for those connections. And we are bang on time, and just wanted to echo the thanks and gratitude coming in the chat box for both Sareen and Maha, and also everyone for engaging. I think it's a big region and a complex topic, and I think it's really, really important for us to have a honest grounding of the situation at hand, and the change that needs to happen slowly and over time, and with care and attention. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be in touch. Right, Walid, we'll connect people up and hopefully lead to further conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maha, and thank you, Sareen, for joining us today. The information that you provided and this sort of discussion is really, really important and very timely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.